The invasion failed before the first pint was finished, and I know how that sounds because I was the officer who approved the landing. My name does not matter now. No one remembers the clerk who stamped disastrous strategy. They remember Commander Valor Threx standing in the middle of a rain-slick Glasgow street at 11:43 at night, his command armor locked from the waist down, his flagship calling him every 3 seconds, and a human male in a worn jacket asking from a pub doorway, "So, are they done interrupting the game?" That human was Jack Sullivan. At first glance, he looked like nothing. White skin, dark hair damp from the rain, about 6 feet tall, maybe 180 pounds, with the relaxed posture of someone who had spent more time carrying beer kegs than military rifles. He was not wearing armor. He was not wearing a uniform. He had no glowing blade, no command implant, no visible rank, no official threat marker above his head. He had one pint on the table behind him, a scuffed pair of boots, and the kind of calm expression that our analysts mistook for poor survival instinct. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was landing in Glasgow on a Friday night and assuming the city would behave like a civilian population. Our doctrine said humans panic when the sky changes color. It said loud engines, armored troops, and orbital shadows create immediate psychological collapse. It said local resistance would scatter in every direction within 90 seconds. That doctrine had been written by beings who had never watched a crowd of Scottish people decide that someone outside was being rude. By the time our first dropships cut through the clouds above the River Clyde, the pub windows were already rattling. Blue light rolled across the wet pavement. Car alarms shouted. Traffic signals blinked out. Somewhere above the rooftops, our speakers delivered the formal occupation order in 61 languages, including English. We expected screaming. We expected running. We expected doors to slam, streets to empty, and humans to hide inside their fragile brick buildings. Instead, one man near the bar looked up from the television and said, "That better not be the satellite signal." 3 others groaned like the universe had committed a personal offense. Jack Sullivan did not even stand at first. He only turned his head toward the window, watched an alien troop carrier settle over the intersection, then looked back at the football match like he was deciding which problem deserved more attention. Outside, Commander Threx descended with a full honor guard, polished armor bright against the rain, voice amplified across the street. He announced that Glasgow was now under external authority. He ordered all humans to remain calm and comply. A glass door opened. Warm pub lights spilled onto the sidewalk. Jack stepped out, still holding his pint, and the entire invasion paused because none of us understood why he was walking toward the commander instead of away from him. Threx looked down at him and said, "Civilian, kneel." Jack glanced at the doorway behind the commander, then at the armored troops blocking the street, then at the pint in his hand. Very carefully, he set it on the windowsill beside him. "Aye," he said, "you are standing between us and the rest of the night." I remember laughing from orbit. Everyone on the command deck laughed. 12 minutes later, nobody was laughing. The street was still wet. The pub was still open. The pint had not moved. At 11:31 that night, Glasgow was doing what Glasgow does when the weather is terrible and the world has the good manners to provide indoor lighting. It was raining sideways. The streets shone black under yellow lamps. Taxis crawled past puddles. Somewhere down the block, a group of humans sang off-key with complete confidence. Inside the pub, heat pressed against the windows. Football played on the television, and every table carried the strange local ritual of people arguing loudly while somehow remaining friends. Our first atmospheric entry shook the clouds above the city, and every tactical model on my display predicted immediate civilian disorder. I watched the probability numbers climb. 72% flight response, 86% shelter response, 91% communication overload. Beautiful numbers. Clean numbers. Numbers that made officers feel clever. Then the pub went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Not because they were terrified, because the television flickered. A man in a green scarf pointed at the screen and said, "If they cut the match, I am writing to somebody." Another human near the bar replied, "Write to the spaceship, then." Laughter followed. Actual laughter. Not nervous. Not desperate. Irritated. That was the first data point our systems rejected as impossible. Jack Sullivan sat near the front window with one elbow on the table, watching the blue glow from our dropships wash across the glass. He had been listening more than speaking. Humans like him are easy to miss if you only measure uniforms. He wore an old dark jacket, plain shirt, jeans, and boots scuffed from work, not ceremony. No rank. No medals. No badge declaring him dangerous for the convenience of invaders. His pint sat close to his right hand. His eyes followed reflections in the window, counting aircraft without turning his head fully. I know that now. At the time, I logged him as calm civilian male, non-hostile. That classification may be the most embarrassing sentence ever entered into a military archive. The occupation broadcast began outside, each word booming between stone buildings with the theatrical weight Commander Threx loved. Citizens of Earth, remain indoors. Surrender public spaces. Do not interfere with Imperial landing operations. The translation was flawless. The effect was not. A woman carrying a tray stopped beside Jack's table and looked toward the ceiling. Did that thing just call Sachi Hall Street an Imperial landing zone? Jack took a slow sip and said, ambitious. The woman snorted and continued walking. Our sensors marked that as emotional instability. It was not. It was contempt wearing a house coat. The second dropship settled lower, pushing rain outward in silver sheets. Glasses trembled on tables. The front door rattled in its frame. A few patrons looked annoyed enough to stand, but not afraid enough to leave. That distinction mattered. Fear makes humans scatter. Annoyance makes them organize. Behind the bar, the owner turned down the television just enough to hear the street. Not off. Down. As if an alien invasion deserved attention, but not priority. Jack noticed the movement outside first. 3 armored scouts crossing toward the pub entrance, their boots splashing through puddles, their rifles held in that universal posture of people expecting obedience. He set his pint down with unnecessary care. Not abandoned. Preserved. Then he stood, rolled his shoulders once, and picked up a wooden bar stool as if moving furniture for a friend. Easy now, the owner said. Jack looked back. I am easy. Outside, the scouts reached the door and pushed it open with the confidence of creatures who had never entered a Glasgow pub uninvited. Warm air rushed out. Rain rushed in. Every human face turned toward them. The lead scout raised one armored hand and ordered the room to kneel. Nobody moved. Jack stepped forward, placed the stool neatly to one side, and smiled without showing teeth. You are new here, he said, so I will explain at once. Jack Sullivan did not raise his voice, which made the room more dangerous than if he had shouted. The lead scout had expected panic, or at least confusion. Our occupation manuals were very clear on that point. Enter a civilian shelter with superior armor, issue a simple physical command, wait for submission, mark the compliant, isolate the loud, continue forward. It had worked on Garden Worlds. It had worked on trade moons. It had worked in cities where people treated peace as a natural condition instead of something that had to be argued into existence every weekend. Glasgow did not read our manuals. The scout repeated the order, louder this time, and the translator gave it a polished authority that should have pressed the room flat. Kneel. Place your hands where we can see them. Jack looked over his shoulder at the bartender. Do they have a reservation? The bartender, a heavy-set man with a white towel over one shoulder, glanced at the 3 armored figures dripping rain onto his floor. Not under that attitude. A few humans chuckled. The scout did not understand the sound. Our system labeled it stress laughter. Wrong again. It was social alignment. It was the room deciding which side it was on without. Holding a meeting. From orbit, Commander Threx watched the pub feed and dismissed the exchange as local disorder. He had conquered 6 coastal cities on Ver Prime by broadcasting surrender terms before landing. He had taken the mining domes of Carthen with 3 squads and a parade formation. His genius, according to his own speeches, was knowing that civilians do not resist power directly. Civilians bend. Civilians hide. Civilians wait for soldiers. So when he looked at Jack Sullivan, he did not see a threat. He saw a delay with a face. That was his mistake, and to be fair, it was a very expensive one. Jack stepped closer to the lead scout, close enough that the alien had to tilt its helmet down. He was still unarmed by our standards. The bar stool sat behind him. His pint remained safe on the table. His hands were open. Human body language files called that non-aggressive. Glasgow body language should have had a separate appendix titled Bad News Delivered Politely. You are blocking the door, Jack said. You are scaring the staff. And you are dripping on a floor that was sticky enough already. The scout reached for him. It was not a dramatic movement, not an attack worth putting in a military history, just a quick armored hand moving to remove one civilian from one doorway. Jack shifted half a step. The scout's hand closed on empty air. Jack placed one palm against the scout's forearm, guided the motion sideways, and let the alien's own weight carry it into the edge of a table. Glasses jumped. The room went silent again, but this time the silence had teeth. The two other scouts raised their rifles. Before they could aim properly, the television behind the bar suddenly blared at full volume. Not because of luck. The bartender had turned the knob. Every alien helmet in the doorway adjusted to the sound. One tiny automatic correction. One fraction of a second of stolen attention. Jack used it. He did not punch like a professional soldier. He moved like a man who had broken up too many parking lot arguments and knew exactly how bodies stumble in tight spaces. One scout tripped over the stool he had placed earlier. Another backed into the swinging door as a woman shoved it open from behind with perfect timing and a face full of complete innocence. The lead scout tried to regain command posture, but Jack stepped in close, twisted the rifle safely away from the crowd, and pinned the alien against the wall with leverage, not strength. It was clean. It was quick. It was humiliating. From orbit, Commander Threx stopped speaking mid-sentence. On the tactical screen, the pub remained marked as a civilian interior. 3 Imperial scouts were now marked as disabled by environmental complications. Jack looked at the room, then at the rain outside, then at the alien camera mounted on the scout's shoulder. He knew we were watching. Of course he knew. He leaned close enough for the microphone to catch every word and said, "Next time, knock." Commander Threx did not send another warning. That was how we knew the pub had become a military problem instead of a civilian nuisance. On the command deck, his jaw plates tightened, his honor guard stepped back, and every officer pretended not to notice that 3 trained scouts had just lost control of a doorway to one bartender, one woman with good timing, and one calm human who still had not raised his voice. Threx pointed at the street map and ordered Compliance Unit 4th to enter from the north side. 6 armored troopers moved through the rain toward the pub with stun shields raised, boots splashing hard enough to send water over the curb. They were not scouts. Scouts asked questions. Compliance units in conversations. Inside, Jack Sullivan looked at the 3 restrained aliens, then at the pub owner. "Back room clear." The owner nodded. "Aye." Jack turned to the room. "Nobody be a hero." That was funny, because everyone in that room immediately began doing exactly what heroes do, only in the most ordinary way possible. 2 older men dragged tables away from the windows. A student pulled the plug on the jukebox, then thought better of it and plugged it back in at full volume. The woman with the tray collected glasses from the front tables with the focus of a battlefield medic handling delicate instruments. Someone locked the side door, then unlocked it again when Jack said, "No. Leave them choices. Bad ones." We did not understand that sentence until 30 seconds later. The 6 troopers reached the entrance and split formation. 3 came through the front. 2 circled toward the side alley. 1 stayed outside to control the street. Standard containment. Sensible. Predictable. Jack watched the front door open, watched the first shield push through, and simply stepped aside. The lead trooper expected resistance in front of him. Instead, he entered too far, too fast, into a room where the floor had been made slick by rainwater, spilled foam, and years of terrible decisions. His shield bumped a table that was no longer where our floor plan said it should be. The second trooper tried to correct around him and found a bar stool sliding gently into his path from somewhere near Jack's boot. Not thrown, not dramatic, just placed with insulting accuracy. The formation folded in on itself like a parade float trying to enter a broom closet. Then the pub moved. Not attacked. Moved. Chairs scraped. Lights flickered. The jukebox roared with some ancient human song that every local seemed to know at the exact worst volume for helmet audio. The bartender snapped a towel across a sensor lens, blinding it for 1 precious second. A man in a football scarf opened the side door just as the alley team arrived, smiled politely, and stepped back into the dark, forcing them to follow into a narrow service corridor full of stacked crates and bad angles. Jack took the lead trooper by the shield edge and turned him, not with brute force, but with timing. The trooper's own push carried him sideways into the doorway, blocking the next 2 from getting a clean line. Jack ducked under an armored arm, guided another shield into the wall, and said, almost apologetically, "Mind the paint." From orbit, our tactical display began producing errors. Unit 4 was not defeated, according to the system. Unit 4 was experiencing interior navigation failure, crowd interference, acoustic disruption, and furniture-based obstruction. Threx stared at those words as if language itself had betrayed him. Outside, the street controller raised his weapon toward the pub windows. Before he could fire, a city bus rolled to a stop between him and the building. Brakes hissing, driver staring straight ahead like this was the most normal delay in Scotland. The bus doors opened. 3 passengers got off. None of them hurried. One looked at the alien, looked at the pub, and said, "Busy night then." Jack appeared in the doorway again, breathing steady, jacket damp, one sleeve torn at the cuff, eyes fixed on the command drone above the street. Behind him, the pub was still standing. The people were still inside. His pint was still waiting on the windowsill. He picked it up, checked it, and looked directly at the drone. "You keep sending them in groups," he said. "That is sweet." At 11:49, Commander Threx made the mistake every invader makes when a small room refuses to obey. He assumed the problem was the room. So he widened the battlefield. New orders flashed across our network, clean and confident. Secure the block. Isolate the building. Cut civilian movement. Establish control points at both ends of the street. It sounded flawless on the display. It looked less flawless on the ground. Glasgow was not built for imperial neatness. The streets bent where they pleased. Alleys appeared between old stone walls like traps with addresses. Rain turned every surface into a mirror. Traffic signs reflected our targeting lights back into our own lenses. Human voices carried from corners our sound maps insisted were empty. The first control team moved east past the pub, shields up, formation tight, boots striking puddles in perfect rhythm. Then a row of parked cars began flashing their hazard lights all at once. Not an attack, not a weapon, just blinking orange confusion across wet glass and metal. Their helmets adjusted. Their map overlays jittered. A garbage truck blocked the lane ahead, moving at exactly the speed of a stubborn animal with a license. The driver leaned one elbow out the window and shouted, "Road is closed, pal." The translator rendered it as a traffic advisory. The soldiers did not know whether to obey it. That was when I realized the city had joined the conversation. Jack Sullivan stepped out from the pub with his jacket collar raised. Against the rain, no helmet, no armor, no visible concern that the entire invasion force had just expanded around him. He did not charge. He did not wave people forward. He simply looked left, looked right, and gave one small nod to the bartender inside. The pub lights flickered twice. Across the street, another set of lights answered. Then another farther down the block. It was not military signaling. It was worse. It was local understanding. Threx ordered drones lower to get a clean image. The drones descended between the buildings and immediately lost formation in the wind tunnel created by the narrow street. One clipped a hanging sign, spun sideways, corrected, and found itself staring through a second-floor window at an elderly woman holding a cup of tea and looking deeply unimpressed. She closed the curtains. The drone marked the encounter as hostile concealment. I marked it as the moment our professionalism began to die. On the western corner, 2 Imperial troopers attempted to herd civilians away from the intersection. The civilians moved, yes, but never were directed. They shuffled slowly, argued about whose taxi was whose, asked questions no translator was built to survive, and somehow left the troopers standing with their backs to the wrong alley. Jack was already there. He stepped from shadow, pressed one hand against a shield rim, guided it into a lamppost, and let the trooper's own momentum do the embarrassing part. The second turned toward him, but a rain-soaked newspaper slapped across its visor, carried by wind or fate or a human hand we never identified. Jack moved in close, redirected the weapon toward the sky, and said, "Careful. There are flats up there." No one in Glasgow seemed surprised by him anymore. That was the frightening part. They treated alien armor as a public inconvenience, and Jack as the man currently handling it. A delivery rider used his bike to block a service lane. 2 teenagers flipped traffic cones into a neat orange barrier. A bus driver opened his doors at the perfect time, releasing a stream of passengers who walked with the sacred confidence of people who had paid their fare and would not be rushed by space politics. Our tactical map became useless. Red markers split, stalled, reversed, and vanished into pockets of city noise. Threx finally understood enough to be angry. "This is not resistance," he snapped. "This is disorder." Jack heard the broadcast through a captured helmet speaker lying on the curb. He picked it up, wiped rain off the grill, and answered softly, "You should see us organized." At 11:56, the city found its rhythm, and our army lost ours. That is the part no official report ever explained correctly. The report blamed weather, poor signal density, architectural interference, and unexpected civilian noncompliance. All true, all useless. What actually happened was that Glasgow began laughing back. Not in one voice. That would have been easy to classify. This was worse. It came from pub doors, apartment windows, taxi radios, bus stops, side streets, and football crowds that seemed to appear wherever our formation lines thinned. A chant rolled down the block, then bounced off stone and glass until our audio trackers marked 30 different crowd locations where only 5 humans stood. Car horns answered from the next street. Bicycle bells rang from an alley. Someone opened the pub door and let the jukebox roar into the ring. The song was old, loud, and apparently beloved by every human within 200 feet, because they all knew the timing. Our helmet filters tried to isolate commands through it. They failed with dignity for 3 seconds, then failed without dignity after that. Commander Threx ordered wide area suppression lights, not harmful, just bright enough to freeze movement and force civilians indoors. The beams dropped from 2 hovering drones, clean white cones cutting through rain. Glasgow responded by opening umbrellas. Hundreds of them. Black, red, blue, plaid, cheap plastic, expensive cloth, all snapping open across sidewalks and doorways like a civilian shield wall assembled by pure annoyance. The drones could no longer separate heads from cover. Human silhouettes multiplied and vanished beneath wet fabric. Jack Sullivan walked through the middle of it, as if the whole city had quietly decided to become his weather. He moved from the pub corner to the traffic island, then to the mouth of a narrow lane, never running, never posing, always arriving exactly where an Imperial squad was about to feel confident. A trooper tried to block him with a raised shield. Jack pointed over the alien's shoulder and said, "Your commander is calling." The trooper turned half an inch. That was enough. Jack guided the shield sideways into a metal post, stepped past, and let 3 locals close the space behind him with trash bins, traffic cones, and 1 very offended stroller. Nothing looked like a battlefield in the Imperial sense. There were no banners, no clean charges, no glorious formations, just a city refusing to make room. 1 squad attempted to secure a bridge approach and found both ends blocked by delivery vans whose drivers had somehow misplaced their keys at the same time. Another squad entered a lane and emerged 2 minutes later missing direction, confidence, and every working map overlay. A third tried to detain a group near the bus stop, only for the entire bus stop to begin giving contradictory directions with the seriousness of licensed tour guides. From orbit, I watched red unit markers slow down, spin, overlap, and hesitate. Hesitation spread faster than fear. It entered the command net in tiny phrases. Confirm route. Repeat order. Unknown crowd density. Visual obstruction. Acoustic interference. Civilian male in dark jacket sighted again. That last one appeared 7 times in 4 minutes from 7 different squads. Threx slammed 1 armored fist into the command rail. How is 1 human in 7 places? No one answered because the truth was humiliating. Jack was not in 7 places. Glasgow was helping him become a rumor. At street level, Jack picked up another captured speaker, held it near his mouth, and spoke into every Imperial helmet still listening. "You came here looking for a surrender," he said, rain running down his face, voice calm as last orders at the bar. Bad street for it. Then the pub crowd behind him started singing louder, and for the first time in the operation, Commander Threx looked away from the map and toward the surface himself. Commander Valor Threx did what proud commanders always do when a map starts embarrassing them. He stopped trusting the map. At 12:02 after midnight, he ordered his personal descent craft to leave the lower cloud layer and bring him to street level. Every officer on the command deck felt the same cold relief. Finally, we thought. Authority was going to arrive in person. Discipline would replace confusion. The locals would see the Supreme Commander in full battle armor, 9 feet of silver-black command plating, signal cloak glowing blue in the rain. And remember that invasions are not neighborhood arguments. I believe that too. I am ashamed of how much I believed it. Threx landed at George Square with 6 honor guards and enough dramatic lighting to make a monument feel underdressed. Rain turned his armor into a moving mirror. His boots touched the pavement, and the occupation broadcast shifted to his personal channel. "Citizens of Glasgow," he said, voice rolling through every speaker we controlled. "Your disorder ends now." For one beautiful second, the street went quiet. Then, from somewhere behind a statue, a human voice shouted, "Who invited Darth Fancy?" The translator failed to process that correctly. Several of our junior officers asked if Darth Fancy was a local military rank. Jack Sullivan heard it from 2 blocks away and actually smiled. That smile concerned me more than the insult. He was standing under a shop awning, rain dripping from his jacket, one hand on a captured helmet speaker, the other tucked casually in his pocket. Around him, people shifted without being told. Not soldiers, not a unit, just humans with umbrellas, work boots, football scarves, delivery bags, and the shared expression of a city that had decided the new arrival was making himself a problem. Threx started forward, and his honor guard moved with him in a perfect wedge. The crowd opened. That looked like obedience. It was not. It was invitation. They gave him a clear street that led exactly where Jack wanted him to go, away from the open square, away from his landing craft, into a narrower road lined with stone buildings, parked cars, metal railings, and too many windows. Our sensors flagged potential. Elevated positions. Threx ignored them. He was watching Jack. Jack was watching everyone except Threx. That was the detail I should have noticed sooner. Jack glanced at the bus driver, then at the pub owner, then at a woman holding a phone beneath a bright red umbrella, then at 2 teenagers leaning against a row of traffic barriers like they had been born waiting for this exact minute. Tiny nods answered him. Half gestures. Eye contact. A city speaking below the volume of war. Threx mistook it for fear. He raised one armored hand and ordered Jack to step forward alone. Jack did step forward, but the city stepped with him. A taxi rolled slowly into one side street and stopped at a perfect angle. A delivery van reversed 3 feet and blocked another. The pub door opened behind Jack, sending warm light and music into the rain like a signal fire. People did not rush. They did not scream. They simply occupied space until the commander's perfect wedge had nowhere elegant left to stand. Threx finally understood that the crowd was not hiding behind Jack. Jack was moving inside the crowd the way a blade moves inside a handle. He was not commanding Glasgow. Glasgow had accepted him as the pointy end. "You are a civilian," Threx said, and for the first time his voice did not fill the street completely. Jack looked at the alien armor, then at the people watching from windows, doorways, and sidewalks. "Ah," he said, "that should worry you." The honor guard tightened formation. The rain got heavier. The pub crowd began clapping in slow rhythm. Not loud, not frantic, just steady enough to make every Imperial helmet try to count it. Threx stepped toward Jack, and every tactical system we had marked the moment as the beginning of a duel. It was not. It was the beginning of Glasgow closing the door behind him. Threx made the first move, because commanders like him always believe motion is ownership. His armor surged forward with a clean mechanical grace, silver-black plates cutting through the rain, boots striking the pavement hard enough to splash water over Jack Sullivan's jeans. The honor guard fanned out behind him, trying to form a command circle, trying to turn a Glasgow side street into a proper Imperial arena. The city refused. A taxi horn blared from the left. A bus hissed from the right. The pub crowd clapped in that slow, maddening rhythm, and every clap bounced off stone walls until our audio systems could not tell whether there were 50 humans or 500. Threx reached for Jack with one armored hand. Jack stepped back half a pace, not retreating, just measuring. The hand passed through rain where his shoulder had been. Jack bumped lightly into a metal railing, caught it with one palm, and pivoted around it as if the street furniture had been installed for this exact purpose. Threx turned after him, fast, angry, precise. Jack did not try to overpower him. That would have been absurd. Threx weighed nearly twice what he did in armor. Instead, Jack made the commander chase inches. A step onto slick paint. A turn near the curb. A shoulder too close to a parked car mirror. A boot landing on a storm drain cover polished by years of rain. Each tiny correction cost Threx balance. Each balance correction made his armor ask his command system for help. And Glasgow was already inside that system. Not with hacking. Nothing so elegant. The woman under the red umbrella had been filming every movement and feeding it to a dozen local phones. The teenagers at the barriers were flashing camera lights at the rhythm of the pub claps. The bus driver kept opening and closing the doors, sending bursts of warm air and radio static across the command frequencies. It was primitive. It was ridiculous. It worked. Threx swung his signal cloak around to clear space, and the glowing threads caught on the metal railing behind him. For half a second, he was not trapped. He was inconvenienced. Against a human like Jack, that was enough. Jack stepped in close, inside the sweep of the armor, and pressed his hand against the commander's wrist joint. Not a strike, a suggestion. Threx's own forward drive carried his arm down and across, locking the cloak tighter around the rail. His honor guard moved to assist. The crowd shifted. Umbrellas opened between them and their commander. A delivery bike rolled across the lane. Someone shouted, "Careful, mate," wet floor, and half the street laughed. Threx tried to rise to his full height, but his right boot had landed in the shallow groove beside the curb where rainwater ran fast over smooth stone. Jack hooked one foot behind the commander's heel, pushed at the wrist joint, and let gravity finish the argument. Threx dropped to one knee, armor sparking harmlessly against the pavement, signal cloak tangled, command lights blinking in confused sequence. No grand explosion. No heroic roar. Just the supreme commander of the invasion stuck in the rain, while a human civilian held his arm at the exact wrong angle. The honor guard froze, because every weapon they carried now pointed toward civilians, windows, buses, and their own commander. Jack leaned close enough for Threx's helmet microphone to catch him. "You called me civilian," he said, breathing hard but steady. "That was your mistake. Around here, civilian does not mean alone." Then he released the commander, stepped back, and looked toward the pub window. His pint still sat on the sill, untouched, impossible, patient. Jack picked it up, took one calm sip, and the entire street cheered so loudly our command deck lost audio for 7 seconds. By 12:18 after midnight, the invasion was no longer an invasion. It was a weather delay with uniforms. That was not my language. That came from the first revised field report, written by an exhausted junior officer who later deleted the line because it sounded disrespectful. He was wrong to delete it. It was the most accurate thing any of us recorded that night. Commander Valor Threx remained on one knee in the rain, his signal cloak tangled around a railing, his armor systems locked in safety mode, and his honor guard surrounded by civilians who somehow looked both cheerful and deeply annoyed. No one harmed him. That made the defeat worse. He had arrived expecting terror, resistance, perhaps even martyrdom. Glasgow gave him inconvenience. His flagship demanded a status update every 3 seconds. Threx did not answer. He was staring at Jack Sullivan, who had returned to the pub window, pint in hand, jacket soaked, hair flattened by rain, expression calm enough to be insulting. Around him, the street kept moving. A bus driver asked whether anyone was still getting on. The bartender checked the front door for scratches. The woman with the tray collected abandoned glasses from the sidewalk. 2 teenagers argued about whether an Imperial Command helmet would make a decent planter. This was not the behavior of a conquered population. This was the behavior of a neighborhood cleaning up after a rude visitor. At 12:21, the first withdrawal order left our command deck. It did not use the word retreat. Military pride rarely allows useful language. It said tactical repositioning pending environmental review. Then a second order followed. Then a third. Drop ships lifted from rooftops. Drones climbed above the rain. Troopers backed out of side streets with the careful steps of people leaving a room where they finally understood they had not been welcome. The humans did not chase them. That confused us almost as much as the fighting had. They simply watched. Some waved. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just with the relaxed confidence of people who had made their point and wanted the road cleared before morning traffic. Threx was recovered by his honor guard after Jack nodded to the crowd and the umbrellas shifted aside. Think about that. The supreme commander of the Western expedition was not freed by superior technology. He was released because one human civilian allowed the street to make room. By dawn, the galactic invasion map updated automatically. Edinburgh was marked unstable. London was marked high resistance probability. Manchester was marked urban unpredictability severe. Glasgow received a new designation none of us had ever used before. No landing recommended under any circumstances. The official reasons cited acoustic confusion, civilian density, local weather, poor maneuver space, and abnormal human group behavior. The unofficial reasons spread faster. Do not interrupt the Scots while they are drinking. Jack Sullivan never gave a speech. He never claimed victory. He never called himself a soldier. He finished his pint, helped the bartender set a table upright, and asked if the match had restarted. That was when I understood what Threx had missed from the beginning. Humans do not always defend their world with flags and armies. Sometimes they defend it with habit, stubbornness, local knowledge, and the shared belief that no one gets to walk into their street and tell them where to stand. We thought we had invaded a city. We had stepped into a living argument, and the argument had chosen a side. The galaxy learned many lessons from Glasgow, but the first was the simplest. Never mistake calm for surrender. Never mistake civilians for weakness. And never, under any sky, assume a human has put down his pint because he is afraid.